to truly bring about change. You really have to be willing to completely tear down the norm, challenge the norm. We really encourage founders to come into our community and build together and be authentic versions of ourselves.
Chandler, thanks for joining the podcast today. Excited to have you on board. I know you're currently in Brazil doing some really innovative work, meeting with innovators. Just tell us a little bit about what sparked the launch of 360 Social Impact Studios and how has your mission evolved since the early days? Because you and I were talking and you've grown globally. So fill us in on that.
Well, thank you so much, Bert, for having me. And I think that it's an awesome opportunity to be able to share with your audience and with everybody a little bit about who we are and how we're different than what already exists. So you asked how 360 Social Impact Studios started. And back in 2020, right after the pandemic, I started working with the University of Washington in their innovation ecosystem as a advisor for faculty members who were spinning out their own projects in the university system, and which then led to me working and teaching for the National Science Foundation and their Innovation Core program, which is hosted. University of Washington hosts the Pacific Northwest Site program, where I taught with that program for a few quarters. And that was really the first experience. Where it all started was I had my office hours were full every week. And it was interesting because I think there were other teaching instructors that didn't have as many people coming to their office hours. And I found that the types of students I was getting was largely female, LGBTQ, immigrant founders. And I really asked, why are you all interested in working with me specifically? And do we need to do more of this type of engagement? And it really came down to individuals feeling like their relationship with me, the interactions that we had empowered them versus making them feel like maybe kind of making them feel stupid. I've heard that from founders before that these mentors or these advisors made me feel kind of dumb. And this idea, we ended up doing a circle group. They call them mentor circles, where we really workshop this. And we asked founders, a lot of the founders that worked with me, what is missing and what can we build to really address this inclusivity around innovation spaces that can promote collaboration and relationship building over necessarily what we're building. So we felt that 360 Social Impact Studios was a critical addition to the ecosystem that didn't exist before. And I think founders would say that 360 creates an inclusive innovation space that really empowers people within it to reach for the dreams that they have for themselves. And I think we provide the tools, the mentorship, the coaching, and the access that allows teams to do that. And so I think that is the evolution. We now have locations in Seattle, in Sao Paulo, in the Republic of Benin, in New York City, where we have some of our core programming. And we really have seen that this message of inclusive innovation spaces where failure and growth are encouraged as a core value really is a universal message that has been the launch.
No, I love how you set out on this mission based on your own experience to create these inclusive innovation spaces, as you talked about, you just mentioned. And you've said a couple of times that, relationships are important in this space. And I've seen in your collateral, you mentioned 360 Social Impact Studios as a vessel for change that challenges norms in the industries. Clearly you're doing that. What does that look like in action, especially with your work across the different geographies and sectors that you mentioned?
As a founder myself, I started a company. I've started a few companies, and we can get to some of those later in this conversation. But we see ourselves as a vessel of change because that is what our organization, myself, I guess speaking for myself, what I feel called to do with my time and my energy here on this world. I think that in order to do anything truly impactful, transformational, you really have to be willing to completely tear down the
Right.
norm, challenge the norm, and be willing to build from scratch to bring something new into the world. We've chosen to do that. Like I said, as a founder myself, I realized that, and from teaching innovation and from supporting hundreds of companies, it's a lot rarer than it sounds, being able to truly bring about change. One of the ways that we challenged this was by creating a very open innovation space that encouraged everybody to collaborate around shared values first. And these values serve as a guide to the impact that we want to make. And so one of the ways that we've kind of challenged traditional norms is by kind of, we don't have a time bound program. We really encourage founders to come into our community and build together, build with us, utilize the resources and relationships that we have, but do it in a way that really takes the pressure off,
Yeah.
like performing. I think we spend a lot of time as founders being inauthentic versions of ourselves to please investors and stakeholders that, and we find ourselves, and I've certainly found myself in working with companies or, even within some of my own companies where we have not committed to the things that we wanted to achieve throughout the entire life of the project and allowed ourselves to be swayed by what people wanted from us versus what we knew we needed to do. This challenge leads into us realizing we also had to start a venture fund and get into the venture space. Part of the work that we've been developing over the last couple of years is a new model for investment. And we created a new financial instrument, a redeemable warrant, that allows us founders to buy back the equity, revenue redemption, using revenue to pay back the equity that we take as an initial position in companies, so that at the end of the 5-year investment period, we can be completely exited from a position that we took as a founder. This is really important because as we think about, for me, the founders being able to keep their companies, and be able to have as much equity that they can from the companies as they start to scale. And I've seen so many organizations like Techstars, YC, other incubator accelerator programs that take 8, 5, 6% equity, and you don't get much value from it. And so rewritten the rules for how we do that and challenge the way we can fund companies and find and return value to our stakeholders by also not taking away from founders. And this is a really critical aspect when we think about the work we do in Brazil and in Africa. As a American, as investors that are coming through to the global South, I think traditionally we've extracted a lot of value without giving back. And so I think it's important that we came up with a model that could allow us to be equitable in how we add value, and then the model demands that we collaborate with teams to move them forward. And I think these are fundamental differences in how we approach.
That's a powerful
our
mission,
work
really.
with
I think
founders.
it's a mission that a lot of founders I think would relate to out there. Just in my discussions with other founders, like this whole concept of trying to please investors, or you join one of these accelerators that then expects some level of output from you, right? It seems like you guys are really changing that model. You're coming in with a different model that's like fresh and unique, and it's in different geographies, not just the US, in Brazil, in Europe, in Africa. So yeah, it's a very powerful mission.
I should mention, we also use a digital innovation platform called Vianeo. Our partners in France are actually here right now in Brazil with us. We just brought them down for a week. And today we've been at our partners, the National Nuclear Energy Commission here in Brazil, talking about the ISO 56001 and 5602 standards. And this is a differentiator because it's a digital innovation model that we're able to institute across our incubator and our venture work. And this is a differentiator that I think allows us to really dig in and validate the work that we do. And it's something that we are exclusive partners for in the Americas. So nobody else literally is working in this way. And so I think together it's a very powerful model.
Yeah. And
that I've
also
never
a testament
seen before.
to your personal drive to achieve that mission. You know, you're taking today's podcast from Brazil, where you're meeting with the Nuclear Energy Commission, you know, and you're literally there on the ground, you know. So it's a testament to what the work you're doing, and we can see it on your lapel too, you know, with the joint flag. There you go. I love that.
Thank you.
Now, tell us, like, for the viewers, you know, like, the types of like companies that have like come out of 360. And there's one that stood out to me as I was going through, you know, your website, which is LifeLens AR, how you're basically bringing these AI and AR powered solutions to healthcare. What are some of like kind of the types of companies, those core use cases from LifeLens AR that you see coming out, and how has like healthcare responded? Like, how have providers responded to those?
You know, it's super interesting. You know, coming from my background's in political science and economics, and then I have my master's in organizational leadership. And so I think getting into the space that I'm in now largely was influenced by my mother and my family in healthcare. My mom is a nurse practitioner, and so I grew up around a lot of technology and systems that were not easy to use. And they actually, you know, my mom retired a little bit early, later than most people retire, but earlier than she would have, because of the burden of having to do all of this administrative, you know, the documentation, the charting, you know, and it's keeping providers away from their families in the evenings, and you know, and causing burnout and stress, and it's actually taking away from the patient experience and ultimately the outcomes that we're looking for. And so, you know, LifeLens AR and the work, I guess broadly, first I'll say we largely focus using SDGs. So the good health and well-being, industry innovation and infrastructure, and quality education. And I guess partnerships for the goals. But you know, these are things that come together that really allow us not necessarily to look at a very specific area, but allow us to think about how these systems work together to create impact that can be translated into health tech, into, you know, sustainable innovation, to nuclear energy, or even oil and gas for innovation. And so I think the LifeLens AR, it's interesting because originally one of the founders started this with me, that we have a provisional patent together, came from the University of Washington. I was his mentor while he was in the Masters of Science and Entrepreneurship program. His company is called Limis. It's an industrial digital log sheet solution that we've built onto a augmented reality wearable. Our partners, we have 2 AR, VR partners and 1 digital twins AR, VR development. And one of them is called DigiLens, one of them is RealWear, and then our AR, VR, and digital twin partners is called Avatar Partners. Together, we really recognized that there was a trend and a move towards industrial wearables, but not in the VR space. I think everybody thinks, like they think gaming when they think AR, VR, or entertainment. And we really see the future of education, the future of patient interactions being largely digital, and being able to leverage those tools to provide more as things digitize. There will be more time for providers to spend with patients. So what are the biggest areas of opportunity that we can find to provide tools for clinicians and providers to be able to improve their workflow, but also be able to, like, for example, Epic, they have a solution called Whisper. It runs in the background of patient and
like
provider, appointments. Yeah, but it is distracting to patients and to providers, and it takes away, as you see the words come up, or as it's transcribing, it takes away from that patient experience. And so we set out together, Evan and I, from our experience doing industrial technology, to apply that in the healthcare space. And so with 5 students from the University of Washington Informatics Capstone program, we patented or got a provisional patent for LifeLens AR, and that's the wearable AI-powered voice-to-text tool that allows providers to dictate and note, do charts, do assessments, do fall reports, do SBARs at the point of care without having to find a workstation, without, we noticed that the quality of the chart goes down with every minute that goes by that they don't enter that information. And this leads to mistakes and to many other downstream effects. So LifeLens addresses that. And I think it is inspired by the very acute reality of growing up with a mother that was a provider and missing a lot of the time in the evenings with her because
that's a big problem in the industry is after hours charting. And, it's exacerbated when you have to go, and providers have to go to post-acute settings, and have to complete charts and systems they're either not familiar with or, not as happy using, so the problems don't just apply to your acute EHRs like your Epics. And there's one thing that stood out to me, which is like, and you might relate to this, is like true innovation happens like when you apply things that work in other industries, like industrials, I know you mentioned, into like a adjacent industry like healthcare. It's pretty fascinating when that happens, when you bring kind of the best practices and trends from another industry into like a different industry, and the possibilities are endless. And you probably see that through 360, right? Because of the breadth and depth of
Absolutely. And one of the things I'm very proud about, Bert, with 360 is that a lot of the teams in our portfolio, their first clients and their first customers are other teams in the portfolio. And I'm sure as a startup how critical and how challenging it can be to get your first customer. I think our model encourages this collaboration because it's not competitive. And I think this competition, think about all the stealth startups out there. Like, if you really had that great of an idea, you wouldn't need to be stealth because nobody can do it like you. And we really try and encourage our founders to think about the things that they uniquely can bring, and leveraging that experience they have to also collaborate with those closest to them. And this is something unique that you don't see with other ecosystems where we promote, we may take 2 or 3 teams that are similar, but then, in the case of LifeLens, it is in the process of getting acquired by another company in our portfolio. And so, this transition has gone from, we see the industrial need, we developed a product and validated it on the healthcare side, and then recognized that it's really the same platform that we're building, just in a different industry.
Described, yeah. And there's other applications too, not just like patient experience, like everything around training in healthcare using AR and VR for that is fascinating. There's a lot of companies in that space,
It's the future, especially in Brazil, here. And actually, I'm the chair of the Washington State Board of Nursing for their long-term care transformation work group. And the long-term care committee for Washington State put out a report last year, or actually this year, that got approved. One of the top 10 trends for the future of health tech education is these mobile or kind of remote learning labs using AR, VR. And I think, my work with a professor, Dr. Tatiana Sadak, who used to be the dean at the School of Nursing at the University of Washington. She's now the deputy dean at Yale School of Nursing. I've been really inspired seeing how their nursing school has really gone all in on simulation, clinical simulations, and how it's transforming the way we learn and reducing the amount of instructor effort that's required for retention. And so I think it is the future, not just in education or in healthcare. For example, in Brazil, there's an organization called SENAI. They're the Industrial Association for the state of Sao Paulo. And for the country, but there's one in Sao Paulo. It's the largest one. They also see the applications in apprenticeships for everything from electrician to plumbers to aerospace engineers, and being able to deliver on-demand decision support, walkthrough. With Avatar partners, we're able to take manuals, 2D manuals that have drawings and renderings, upload them, and create 3D models directly within the the glasses or the headsets that we use. And so this application, it's not far off.
100%.
It's
And
only
like
going to
I was
continue to
joking
grow.
the other day, maybe not have joking, but you combine all these fascinating technologies that work, and you end up in this world where things are work better, right? Like think about like having clinical simulation with AR VR. In the AR VR, you're able to simulate 3D models of what you're doing, right? So like combine all these together and you end up with a fascinating ecosystem, and I'm sure you guys are pushing that and helping companies connect those dots, right? That they may not be seeing already because they're such a expert in what they're doing. And then if they look, outside of that, it's like there's actually a lot more connection points I didn't even think about.
Absolutely. And I'd say if anybody's interested in the clinical application of AR, VR I would encourage you to check out DASA's, DASA, DASA. They have a biodesign lab based in Rio de Janeiro, led by Dr. Huron Werner, who is revolutionizing the way
Wow.
they train physicians and other healthcare professionals using 3D technologies. I was just there with my partner, Christina. One of their models is taking, using VR and taking you through the women's reproductive system and being able to help doctors understand the complexities of women's health, and then taking that and applying it in physical space to actually practice the procedures. And so I'm so inspired by the ingenuity and the creativity that is unlocked when we think about things through a different world. And this truly is a different world of application. And I think that they really are leaders and we've learned a lot from them in sharing the best practices, the roadblocks in what is effective and what really shows results when applied.
Yeah, because in the traditional sense, you have your clinical simulation that's meant to simulate different trainings that like scenarios that providers run into, but then there are other types of training like you're mentioning with reproductive systems and OBGYN providers, like that they start to use some of this in their own training and training their own team to like get better at and see a visual before it's with the real patient,
Precision customized medicine. It is. While I was at the lab in Daza, a doctor was there working with one of their 3D specialists and practicing for a procedure on brain surgery that they were doing to really understand what that, vasculature looks like within the brain, to practice ahead of time and understand more about the case that they're working on. And it is truly revolutionary to see this applied.
It's fascinating. Neuroscience and neurology is an area that's taking off with that too. It's incredible. Chandler, I want to go back to a point you made earlier where you said we also had to start a venture fund, And so like with all this that we talked about, like how do you see all this work connecting with ventures and deploying capital in new ways? Because clearly you work with a lot of different founders and innovators. So how has that like influenced, ventures and deploying capital?
Totally, Bert. I think this is one of the most fundamental questions when you think about the communities that we serve, largely founders who have been traditionally underrepresented in venture capital. This could be female, LGBTQ, immigrants, first-time founder, or like first generation founders. This is basically everybody that is not, what we've seen in venture capital for the last 100 years. We recognized, and I think I'll use an example from one of our founders. As an underrepresented founder, there are challenges that we experience that other founders may not. And largely that's with network and access to capital and support. I think, like partly what we do is just provide trusted advisory to founders who don't have the network or don't have the relationships to navigate that. And so we recognize that if we weren't going to be funders, if we weren't going to take the initiative to listen to our community and literally rewrite the way traditional venture has been done using this warrant model, where we don't take equity from teams if at all possible, and they have 5 years to buy us out of that position. We recognize that founders who had said before, we're not interested in taking venture, or we're not interested in going the venture capital route, have come back and said, but we'd be willing to take money from you. Within that response is so deep because we say, oh, well, 40% or 50% of these founders go on, and maybe need venture. Well, I think that the traditional venture capital system misses everybody that they have previously
Right.
excluded in that group. And it's a completely untapped and undervalued resource and market. A traditional VC would never connect with the types of teams and companies that we would, because there's not the incentive, the trust, or the relationship to facilitate that. That's where we come in. We realize that in order to fund and be able to stay committed to creating positive social impact across communities that was globally scalable, we had to be the funder. And this work has driven us to design with that intention in mind, that we are really going to be committed to being a different type of investor and reimagine the way a relationship between a funder and a founder works. We are redefining it. That there's not very many people you come across, Bert, that are committed to leaving founders better than they found them, and by giving them the equity back in the companies through a very novel way of repayment.
I love that. That's a great nugget at its own. Leaving founders better than you found them. Like that's powerful. Like just take a second to understand that, and it speaks to your guys's mission, as a new type of venture, and helping these underrepresented founders. And, for those like founders out there and innovators listening to this, and it's like, this is what I need. I've been on this journey. I'm struggling, going down the VC route, or I'm not getting the support I need. How do they engage with you and your team? Or on the flip side, anyone else listening that wants to potentially partner with you guys, like how do they engage with you and your team online?
We make ourselves very available on our website. You can book a time to meet with us. My email, Chandler at 360socialventures.com. Largely check out the website. We're continuing to add things to that. 360socialimpactstudios.org. Our LinkedIn has a lot of the activities that we do and highlights the founders that we work with. We find that people that want to get in touch with us, that are committed to doing things their way, they find us. And so we encourage people, whether you are, just want to learn more, or whether you're really committed to building with us and building the community of impact and creating those bridges. There's room for everybody that wants to make a positive impact on the world. And I think it takes a team like ours to be able to help people hone and refine that. But I'm sure, talk to any of our founders, that the work and the way that we engage with our founders and our teams is unlike anybody else in the world. And so I hope people find us and are able to either connect or partner, because we believe that this mission is beyond the communities that we're touching now, and is really a larger mission in being able to support the founders that are doing the work.
I love that.
To make
and quick plug for you. You guys, don't just have this really powerful mission. You're in different geographies across the world, right? So we talked about Brazil, but Africa as well, Europe, Seattle, and New York in the US. So, wherever those founders, innovators are, odds are you guys can support them in their areas, because you have this global focus. So I wanted to plug that in.
Yeah. And if we don't, then we have partners that do. And so, there's never been a better time to innovate for the future. And the tools that are available to help us get there are making that path and the time that it takes to bring those products to market smaller and smaller. And so, I think anybody that sees themselves either as a solo founder, as a part of a small team, there is absolutely a way for you to work with us and to connect with any of the geographies that we work in. Or bring us to yours. We're heading up to Harvard University after this. Severine Herlin, the CEO of Vianeo, and myself, as well as a few of the founders. Actually, one of my founders from the African cohort we brought him to Boston for the event. I have a founder coming from Seattle and some coming from Boston area. We intentionally bring communities together to share values and to share learning about how we
Yeah.
are successful in the different regions. And I think the
Yeah.
collaboration is
I
the
love that.
core
Well,
of all of the
how many
work that we do.
venture partners out there can say they bring you to, their partners at Harvard, right? Like that's special, So yeah, I
It's
love
a
that.
lifelong
I've
commitment,
really enjoyed
right?
having you today on today's podcast, Chandler. And for any of those listening, founders, innovators that are looking for support, who to reach now, Chandler at his team at 360. And it was a pleasure speaking to you today, Chandler, and hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Brazil. And yeah, and, we'll be supporting the mission, as we can.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure to be here. And no matter what, I'll leave you with this, that, we all have a mission and a purpose here in this world. And I think if there's a way for us to be able to help people get there,